Good morning, sir. Good morning, guys. I am Cadet Angana De Luis from Group 1, and today we are going to tackle about indigenous people in the Philippines. This is for educational use only. Our group is allowed by instructor Mr. Roldan Ardines to use this in educational material. Indigenous people in the Philippines are incredibly diverse, known as Lumad in Mindanao, Igorot in Northern Luzon, and by other names based on their specific ethnic groups and regions. They have rich cultures, unique languages, traditions, and beliefs adding to the country's cultural tapestry. Notable indigenous groups include Igorot, residing in Cordillera Mountains of Northern Luzon, known for their stunning rice terraces, traditional attire, and distinctive costumes. Mangyan. On Mindoro Island, they comprise multiple subgroups, each with its language and culture. They've celebrated from intricate beadwork and weaving. Lumad. We found in Mindanao, Lumad communities like Manubo, Tibuli, and Blaan have strong ties to their ancestral lands, rich oral traditions, and artistic heritage. 4. Eta. Indigenous to Luzon, especially in Zambales and Tarlac Mountains, they're among the Philippines' earliest inhabitants and hold profound knowledge of forest resources. Tagbanawa. In Palawan, they excel in marine resource management and use a unique script, the Tagbanawa script. That is all. Thank you.
Good evening, everyone. This is Cadet Campasas Felix Harold, and for today's discussion, I'm going to share with you the indigenous languages and scripts of the Philippines. So there are some 130 to 195 languages spoken in the Philippines, depending on the method of classification. Almost all are Malayo-Polynesian language native to archipelago. A number of Spanish-influenced Creole varieties generally called Chavacano, along with some local varieties of Chinese, are also spoken in certain communities. The 1987 Constitution designates Filipino as standardized version of Tagalog of the national language and official language along with English. Filipino is regulated by commissions of Filipino language and serves as lingua franca used by Filipino of various ethnologistics background. While Filipino is used for communication across the country's diverse linguistic groups and in popular culture, the government operates mostly using English, including second language speakers. There are more speakers of Filipino than English in the Philippines. The other regional languages are given officially auxiliary status in their respective places according to the Constitution, but particular languages are not specified. Some of these regional languages are also used in education. The indigenous scripts of the Philippines, such as the Kulitan, Tagbanwa, and others, are used very little. Instead, Philippines languages are today written in the Latin script because of the Spanish and American colonial experience. Baybayin, though generally not understood, is one of the most well-known of the Philippine indigenous scripts and is used mainly in artistic applications such as current Filipino banknotes, where the word Filipino is inscribed using the writing system. Additionally, the Arabic script is used in Muslims areas in the southern Philippines. Tagalog and Cebuano are the most commonly spoken native language, together with comprising about half of the population of the Philippines. Only Filipino and English are official languages and are taught in school. This, among other reasons, has resulted in a rivalry between the two language groups.
Good day, everyone. I am Cadet Jose Castro. I discuss about indigenous culture and traditions, which is indigenous language and script. Indigenous cultures, tradition in the Philippines encompass a rich diversity of language and script, where are the key except of this distal elements and heritage. So I have three types of language script. First, cultural identity. Cultural identity are the distinct identities of people, of groups, and culture of substructural categories and social groups. Categories that make cultural identities include sexuality, gender, religion, identity, social class, and region, where are often born into our cultural identities. Second is bilingualism. Bilingualism, ability to pick two languages. It may be acquired early by children in regions where most adults speak two languages. AIG, French, and Political, German. Children may also become bilingual by learning languages into two different social things. For example, British children in British India learn an Indian language. For the nurse and family servants, a second language can also be required in school. The last one is language prevention rather. Language prevention is the prevention and endangered of dead language, with language death, studies and linguistic, anthropology, prehistory, and psychology, lost diversity.
I'm Decadet Soriano and my topic is all about indigenous cultures in the Philippines, arts and crafts. Indigenous cultures in the Philippines boast a rich and diverse tradition of traditional arts and crafts that serve as a vibrant testament to their cultural heritage. These crafts encompass a wide array of creative expressions, including basketry, pottery, textiles, wood carving, metalwork, mats, and hats. Each of these art forms carries a unique cultural significance and reflects the profound connection of indigenous communities to their traditions and the natural world. Basketry, pottery, and textiles exemplify the meticulous craftsmanship of these communities. Skilled artisans use materials like bamboo, rattan, and pandan. Pandan leaves to create intricately woven baskets and mats and exquisitely designed textiles. These pieces are not only visually captivating but also serve practical purposes within their communities. Wood carving, jewelry, and tattoos are not merely decorative but deeply symbolic. Wood carvers create stunning designs on various objects from furniture to traditional weapons, while indigenous jewelry incorporates natural materials like shells and seeds and tattoos. In particular, holds significant cultural meaning, often denoting status, achievements, or tribal affiliations. Metalwork and beadworks are expressions of functional and ornamental artistry, with brass gongs and bells used in traditional music and rituals, and intricate bead designs adorning clothing and ceremonial items. Mats and hats woven from local materials like palm leaves and nipa palm are both utilitarian and culturally meaningful, often used in daily life as well as in rituals and ceremonies. These traditional arts and crafts are not only showcase the creative talents of the Philippines, indigenous peoples, but also play an essential role in preserving their cultural diversity and heritage in the face of modernization.
So in importance to the topic indigenous land and resource rights, challenges in land disputes and exploitation, land disputes, cultural erosion, cultural disruption. Land displacement and resource exploitation can disrupt traditional indigenous ways of life, leading to the erosion of cultural practices, languages, and social structure. Loss of spiritual sites. The destruction of sacred sites due to response exploitation can have a profound impact on the spiritual and cultural identity of the indigenous community. Next is resource exploitation. Economic pressures. poverty, and economic vulnerability. Some indigenous communities face economic pressures that make them more susceptible to land deals and resource extraction. Poverty can force them into agreements that are not in their long-term interests. Climate change and environmental stressors, environmental changes, climate change and environmental stressors such as extreme weather events affect the resilience of indigenous communities, making it more difficult to sustain traditional resources management practices. So next is violence and conflict. So lack of enforcement and compliance, weak enforcement. Enforcement of laws and regulation protecting indigenous land and resources rights can be weak, allowing illegal activities to persist. Limited compliance. Some corporations may not fully comply with environmental and social responsibility standards, exacerbating the negative impacts of indigenous lands and communities. Efforts to address these challenges includes legal advocacy, community mobilization, and partners with NGOs and government agencies. Protecting the indigenous land and resource rights is essential not only for the well-being of indigenous communities but also for the sustainability management of natural resources and preservation of cultural heritage in the Philippines. That's all. Thank you.
Indigenous land and resource rights. Indigenous ecological knowledge. Indigenous land and resource rights in the Philippines are closely intertwined with the wealth of indigenous ecological knowledge held by these communities. This traditional knowledge encompasses a deep understanding of local ecosystems, sustainable resource management, and the interplay between culture and the environment. Here are the key aspects of indigenous ecological knowledge. So, number one is ecosystem understanding. So, first is what is an ecosystem? An ecosystem is a geographic area where plants, animals, and other organisms, as well as weather and landscape, work together to form a bubble of life. Ecosystems contain biotic or living parts as well as abiotic factors or non-living parts. Biotic factors include plants, animals, and other organisms. Maintaining healthy and active ecosystem can purify our water and air, maintain the level of fertility of our soil, regulate the climate by adapting to certain changes, and finally help in recycling the biodegradable nutrients and provide us with healthy food. It controls essential ecological process and promotes lives involved in the recycling of nutrients between biotic and abiotic components. It helps maintaining the usual flow of energy in an ecosystem including carbon dioxide, energy cycle, nitrogen cycle, oxygen cycle, and water cycle. Number two is plant and animal diversity. So, the diversity of plant and animals is called biodiversity. Biodiversity is all the different kinds of life you'll find in one area. The variety of animals, plants, fungi, and even microorganisms like bacteria that make up our natural world. Biodiversity is essential for the process that support all life on Earth, including humans. Without a wide range of animals, plants, and microorganisms, we cannot have the healthy ecosystem that we rely on to provide us with the air we breathe and the food we eat. And people also value nature itself. The diversity of arthropods, herbs, birds, and mammals significantly increase with plant diversity regardless of species habitat. However, correlations were stronger when plant and animal species richness were compared between habitats than within single habitats. So, tropical rainforest supports the greatest diversity of living organisms on Earth. Although they cover less than 2% of Earth's surface, rainforests house more than 50% of all plants and animals found in land. Greater biodiversity in ecosystems, species, and individuals leads to greater stability. For example, species with high genetic diversity and many populations that are adapted to a wide variety of conditions are more likely to be able to weather disturbance, disease, and climate change.
So, indigenous history and heritage during the pre-colonial societies. The indigenous history and heritage of the Philippines are marked by diverse pre-colonial societies that existed before the arrival of Spanish colonizers in the 16th century. These societies were characterized by unique cultures, economies, and social structures. So here are some key aspects of pre-colonial indigenous societies in the Philippines. So first, we have the agriculture. So pre-colonial societies were primarily agrarian with rice, sugarcane, and various root crops being cultivated. Advanced irrigation systems and terraced farming were used to maximize agricultural productivity. Then second, the trade and commerce. Indigenous peoples are engaged in extensive trade networks both within the Philippines and with neighboring regions like Southeast Asia and China. Barter systems are and the use of precious materials like gold and porcelain were common in trade. And social structure. Society was often organized into various social classes with a ruling elite, commoners and slaves or serfs. Social hierarchy and leadership roles were determined by kinship, age, and achievements. Then religion and spirituality. Indigenous belief systems were diverse, encompassing animism, ancestor worship, and polytheism. Spirits were believed to inhabit natural elements, and rituals were performed to honor and appease these spirits. Art and culture. Pre-colonial societies had rich artistic traditions, including sculpture, pottery, and textile weaving. Elaborate jewelry, often made from gold and precious stones, showcased the craftsmanship of indigenous artisans. Architecture. Indigenous communities constructed various types of dwellings, from stilt houses in coastal areas to more fortified structures in the mountains. Intricate carving and design elements were common in architectural features. Government and leadership. Different regions had varied systems of governance, including chieftaincies, sultanates, and confederations. Leadership roles were hereditary or based on merit. Education and tradition. Education was often informal, with knowledge passed down through oral traditions. Storytelling, epic narratives, and songs were used to transmit cultural historic knowledge. And the warfare. Conflicts and territorial disputes occasionally led to warfare between indigenous groups. Weapons included bows and arrows, spears, and bladed weapons. Maritime skills. Given the archipelagic nature of the Philippines, many indigenous communities had advanced maritime skills. They were skilled navigators and boat builders, using various types of watercraft for fishing and trade. Environmental stewardship. Indigenous societies had a deep respect for the environment and practiced sustainable land and resource management. They developed forest conservation practices and maintained a harmonious relationship with nature. So, these pre-colonial indigenous societies were characterized by resilience, adaptability, and a deep connection to their ancestral lands, while Spanish colonization brought significant changes to the Philippines. Elements of these indigenous cultures and traditions continue to thrive.
Indigenous land and resources rights, central domain and land tenure system. Indigenous land and resources rights in the Philippines are protected and governed by laws and policies that recognize the concept of a central domain and traditional land tenure systems. These mechanisms are crucial for safeguarding the territorial rights and cultural heritage of the indigenous communities. Here's an overview of these concepts. A central domain refers to the land, territories, and resources that indigenous people or communities have traditionally owned, occupied, or used for their livelihoods and cultural practices. These central domains are an integral part of their identity, culture, and sustainable development. A central domain recognizes the historical and ongoing relationship of indigenous people with their lands and respect their rights to govern and manage these territories as they see fit. It ensures that the indigenous communities have control over the resources found within their central domains. Land tenure systems refers to the way land is owned, used, and transferred in a particular society or country. It encompasses the legal and customary rights and responsibilities that individuals or groups have over land and natural resources. There are different types of land tenure system around the world. Some common examples include freehold. This is the absolute ownership of the land, where the owner has full rights to use, sell, lease, or transfer the land as they see fit. Second, the leasehold. Under this system, the landowner grants a lease or rental agreement to another party, allowing them to use the land for a specified period of time. The lease or tenant usually pays rent or fees to the landowner. And last, the customary tenure. Found in many traditional or indigenous communities, customary tenure is based on customary laws and practices. It typically involves commonwealth ownership and usage rights, where the land is collectively managed and allocated by the community. And last, the challenges and threats of this associated with ancestral and domain and land tenure system can vary depending on the specific context and location. However, some common challenges and threats include encroachment and land grabbing. Indigenous communities often face encroachment on their ancestral lands by external parties such as companies or governments who exploit the natural resources or convert the land for the purposes. This encroachment can result in the disposition and displacement of indigenous communities. Inadequate legal recognition. May indigenous communities lack legal recognition of their central domain rights, leading to land insecurity and vulnerability. This can result in conflicts with non-indigenous communities.
The indigenous and land resources right. In terms of challenges in land disputes and exploitation, in the indigenous land and resources right in the Philippines face a significant challenges, particularly in the context of land disputes and resources exploitation. These challenges may threaten the territorial right, integrity, cultural heritage, and well-being of the indigenous community. Here are the key challenges in this regard. First is the land disputes. Disputed lands disputes often arise when the boundary of the indigenous ancestral domain are contested by stakeholders, including the government agency, corporation, and neighboring communities. Lack of legal documentation in some cases, the indigenous communities lack of formal documentation such as certificate of ancestral domain titles or CADs to prove their land claims. This can lead them to vulnerable to land grabs. The second one is the resources exploitation. Mining. Indigenous ancestral land are frequently targeted for mining or operation, leading to environmental degradation, displacement of communities, and the health risks due to the exposure of hazardous substances. Logging and deforestation. Usual and unsustainable logging practice can lead into deforestation and loss of critical habitats. This not only disrupts the ecosystem but threatens the livelihood of the indigenous communities. Commercial agriculture. Expansion of the commercial agriculture, including the palm oil, rubber plantation, can result into conversion of indigenous land and displacement of communities. The third one is the violence and conflict.
Violence and intimidation, indigenous activities and leaders advocating for land resources often face threats, violence, and intimidation from vested interests, including the powerful economic entities and land conflicts. Land conflicts are land disputes that can be escalated into conflicts, resulting in displacement and loss of lives and disruption of community life. The fourth one is the lack of legal support. Limited access to legal assistance made the indigenous community this lack access to resources and representation and making it challenging for them to defend their land and their resources right in the court. That's all. Thank you.
Indigenous ecological knowledge, or IEK, refers to the traditional knowledge system and practices of indigenous communities that have been developed over generations through interaction with the environment. IEK encompasses a range of knowledge, including traditional climate and weather forecasting methods. Indigenous communities have often relied on their observation of nature and their deep connection with the land to predict climate and weather patterns. Their knowledge is based on holistic observation of natural phenomena such as change in plant and animal behavior, seasonal shifts, sky patterns, wind direction, and cloud formation. Here are some examples of indigenous ecological knowledge related to the climate and weather forecasting. First is seasonal observation. Indigenous communities often have extensive knowledge of the natural cycles and patterns of the environment. This includes observing change in animal behavior, migration patterns, flowering and fruiting of plants, and other indicators that can help predict weather conditions. Second is sky and cloud pattern. Indigenous communities have developed deep knowledge of the sky and cloud patterns, which they use to predict weather change. For example, they can observe the appearance and movement of specific cloud formation, change in the color of the sky, or the behavior of birds to predict upcoming weather conditions. Indigenous ecological knowledge refers to the accumulated knowledge, practices, and beliefs that indigenous peoples have developed over generations for managing their lands, resources, and ecosystem sustainably. This knowledge is derived from a deep understanding and observation of the natural world and its processes. Sustainable resources management is an approach that focuses on balancing human needs with the conservation and regeneration of natural resources and ecosystem for the benefit of present and future generations. Indigenous peoples have a long history of practicing sustainable resources of management, as their survival and cultural identity have been closely tied to the health and well-being of their environment. Here are some key aspects of the indigenous ecological knowledge related to sustainable resource management. First is holistic approach. Indigenous peoples perceive the environment as a whole interconnected system. As their approach to resource management reflects this understanding, they consider the ecological, social, and cultural dimension of sustainability and emphasize the importance of maintaining balance and harmony among all elements. Second is traditional ecological knowledge. Indigenous peoples have developed an extensive body of knowledge about a specific ecosystem, including plant and animals species, their behaviors, habitats, and interrelationships. This knowledge has been passed down orally through generation and plays a significant role in sustainable resources management.